Beneath the glowing lights of Coney Island's Dreamland, the air smelled of popcorn and something sweet. Barkers shouted over the mechanical whirl of rides, promising the usual marvels: fire dancers, human oddities, and electric wonder. But tucked between the scenic railway and the Illusion Palace stood something both tender and deeply unsettling. A long white building with a sign that read, "Infant Incubators. All the world loves a baby." Inside, behind glass, were rows of impossibly tiny infants, each one fighting for life under the watchful gaze of nurses in crisp white uniforms. The survival, or death, depended on the generosity of strangers and the morbid curiosity of the crowd. This wasn't a hospital. This was Dreamland. And these are the incubator babies of Coney Island. Was this compassion or exploitation? This is Death Kiss Traveler. My name is Marissa, your morbidly curious host. Thank you to my listeners. This is month 4, and I can't believe how much it has grown. Don't forget to subscribe and follow on TikTok, Instagram, or even Facebook at Death Kiss Traveler Podcast. And if you love it, share it with your friends. I appreciate the support. Now let's get into our story. At the turn of the 20th century, America was teetering on the edge of modern medicine, but not quite there yet. Hospitals were places of last resort, sterile in only theory and filled with a sense of resignation. If you were born too soon, too small, too fragile, you weren't seen as a patient. You were a tragedy waiting to happen. In the early 1900s, 1 out of every 5 babies didn't survive their first year of life. And for those born premature, survival was almost unheard of. Doctors didn't have incubators. They didn't understand nutrition for preemies, and in many hospitals, they didn't even bother trying. The medical community considered them weaklings or nature's mistakes, and they believed intervention was futile. But across the Atlantic in Europe, something new was stirring. At the 1896 World's Fair in Berlin, French physician Dr. Alexandre Lyon unveiled a strange-looking glass and steel device, a heated box that could mimic the warmth of a mother's womb. It was called the Coveuse, an early incubator. His invention saved lives, but it also became a curiosity. People paid to see these miraculous machines and the tiny humans inside them. Among the spectators was a man named Martin Coney, an immigrant who would later claim to have studied under Lyon himself. He understood something most doctors didn't. People will pay for a spectacle long before they'll pay for science. And so, Coney found a way to bring his strange, life-saving technology to the masses. Not in a hospital ward, but in a place built for wonder and shock, the amusement park. When he arrived in America in the early 1900s, Coney discovered that hospitals refused to adopt incubators. They were too expensive, too experimental, and in the eyes of many doctors, too unnatural. So he took his idea to the only place that would listen, Coney Island. Coney Island at the time wasn't just an amusement park. It was the amusement park, a sprawling city of fantasy and innovation. There was Luna Park, Electric Park, Steeplechase, and of course Dreamland, the grandest of them all. Dreamland promised education through spectacle. It was a place where people could see the world in the afternoon. Miniature cities, deep-sea divers, simulated disasters, and marvels of science. When it opened in 1904, Dreamland was meant to be more than just an amusement park. It was billed as the refined alternative to its rowdier neighbor Luna Park. Where Luna offered thrills and chaos, Dreamland promised progress, but it was built on illusion. And yet, in the middle of it all was a spectacle. Among the dancers, the fire breathers, and the painted towers, one exhibit stood for something real. Coney's infant incubator exhibit fit perfectly. It wasn't billed as a freak show, it was a medical miracle in action. Behind the carnival facade, the exhibit was immaculately clean. Nurses in white uniforms stood beside rows of gleaming incubators, each one humming softly with heat and oxygen. Where else could you literally watch life being preserved by electricity and modern science? It sounds cruel, even grotesque to modern ears. Babies on display beside freak shows and carnival rides? But this was the only way to fund their survival. Hospitals wouldn't listen. The government wouldn't help, so Coney turned to the crowds. And against all odds, it worked. Visitors described it as strangely serene, hushed compared to the noise outside. People stepped in from the chaos of the roller coasters and the barkers into a room where time seemed to slow down. The air was warm, the incubators softly humming. Outside, the barkers shouted, "Come see the babies, the tiniest humans in the world, fighting for life." Inside, visitors found something unexpected. Not horror, but awe. And for 25 cents, they could witness something they've never seen before. Medicine giving hope where nature had failed. Some laughed, some cried, some prayed, and all the while, Dr. Coney used the proceeds to pay for the nurses, wet nurses, electricity, and medical care. These weren't orphans or performers. They were real infants. Coney became known through the word of mouth and newspaper stories as the man who could save premature babies. Parents, often from working class or immigrant backgrounds, would hear about him through nurses, midwives, or other families who had been to his exhibit. Most of the families who brought babies to Coney were immigrants, Jewish, Italian, Irish, or Eastern European, newly arrived in New York and unable to afford private medical care. Hospitals turned them away, often with fatal results. Or they were working-class families with nowhere else to go. At Coney Island, Coney took them in without judgment. Nurses later recalled that he would sometimes stand outside the exhibit himself, greeting frantic parents and saying, "Give me the child, we'll do what we can." And remarkably, they often succeeded. They would bring their newborns directly to the incubator building at Dreamland, or later to his Atlantic City facility. Some were rushed there just hours after giving birth, swaddled in blankets, barely breathing. After a baby was admitted, it received a bath, and if it was able to swallow a small dose of brandy, then it was swaddled in a pink or blue blanket and placed in an incubator where it stayed on view all day, except during feedings every 2 hours. Aside from constant warmth, what the newborns needed most was breast milk, in whatever form it could be administered, a wet nurse, bottle, or even spoon-fed through the nose. Coney and his trained nurses would weigh the babies daily and provide around-the-clock care entirely for free. The parents didn't pay a cent. The cost of keeping each baby alive was covered by the admission fees from the crowd. So in a strange twist, the paying visitors became the benefactors. Every coin dropped at the ticket booth literally went toward milk, nurses' salaries, sterilized bottles, and electricity for the incubators. But not everyone saw these fragile babies as worth saving. At the turn of the 20th century, a cold question echoed through medical journals. A question printed plainly in the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal in 1901. Was it even worth the effort? These tiny infants, they argued, might be weak stock or burdens. Nature's mistakes. The idea wasn't whispered. It was published, discussed, and accepted by many. In Chicago, a physician went so far as to produce a film carrying a chilling slogan: "Kill defectives, save the nation." That is truly disgusting. And out in the open, at fairgrounds across the country and the Carnival Midway of America, competitions were held. Better Babies Contest. Picture it. Smiling families, judges with clipboards, ribbons pinned to the healthiest, strongest, most acceptable babies. These events were celebrated, cheered even. They rewarded perfection and quality, condemning anything less. And sometimes those contests happened just a few tents away from where the incubator babies were fighting for their lives. Two worlds side by side. One celebrating the ideal child, the other desperately trying to prove that every child deserves a chance. When a baby grew strong enough, the parents took them home. Free of no charge, no contracts, no hidden costs, Coney didn't keep records for profit. He kept them for science. Many families stayed in touch, sending letters and photographs as their children grew. Some even came back to Dreamland or Atlantic City years later, proudly showing their healthy son or daughter to the nurses who once cared for them. Most of the infants brought to Dr. Coney's exhibit were extremely premature by early 1900s standards, usually between 5.5 and 7 months gestation. That's around 24 to 32 weeks into pregnancy. Many weighed between 1 and 3 pounds, roughly the size of a small loaf of bread or a bottle of milk. A few were so small they could fit into a man's hand. For comparison, modern NICUs can save infants born as early as 22 and 23 weeks. But in 1900, even 36-week babies were considered too weak to live. Coney's babies would have been considered beyond help by any hospital at the time. Coney's records show that he sometimes kept babies for up to 6 months if they needed more support. Despite the baby's fragility, Coney's survival rate was a staggering 85%. Remember, this was an era where hospitals were losing nearly every premature baby that came through their doors. That survival rate is one reason the exhibit gained so much attention. To the public, these babies seemed like miracles, tiny, pink, living proof that science could change fate. What started as a sideshow would ignite a revolution into neonatal care. But in those early years, no one could have known that a man on the fringes of medicine, running a carnival attraction, was quietly laying down the foundation for the modern neonatal intensive care unit. This strange intersection of entertainment and empathy raised uncomfortable questions. Even back then, were these babies being saved? Or were they being used? Was it an act of mercy or marketing? For Dr. Martin Coney, it was both necessity and strategy. He had no funding from hospitals, no grants, no government support. Every feeding bottle, every ounce of milk, every nurse's salary was paid through the admission of tickets. Visitors weren't just voyeurs, they were unwitting donors. Their nickels and quarters literally brought life. But to the moralists of the time, it was unthinkable. Many critics condemned the exhibit as indecent, accusing Coney of exploiting human suffering for profit. Newspaper editorials called it a carnival of pity, arguing that life and death medicine didn't belong next to the funhouse. And yet the results spoke for themselves. The average stay there was anywhere from 1 to 3 months, depending on how early the baby was born. Once they reached around 5 pounds, Coney would send them home with their parents. Nurses taught families how to feed and care for their still fragile infant. Long before home nurses or discharge protocols even existed, thousands of premature babies survived because of these so-called sideshows. Coney kept meticulous records. Many of those incubator babies grew up, lived long lives, had families of their own. Some even became advocates for premature infants decades later, grateful for the bizarre circumstances that saved them. In an interview given in her 90s, Lucille Horn said, quote, "People paid to see me, and that's what kept me alive. Without that show, I wouldn't be here. So I guess I owe my life to the carnival." End quote. She lived to be 96 years old. She was just one of the babies who survived. Another woman, Beth Allen, recalled her mother telling her that strangers had sent letters asking for updates, saying they'd prayed for the little girl in the 3rd incubator. The babies had become public darlings, symbols of fragile hope in a mechanical age. Still, the controversy never fully faded. For some, it was disturbing that medical care depended on spectacle. For others, it was proof that compassion doesn't always come from the places we expect. And Dr. Coney was a complicated figure. Part showman, part doctor, part crusader. He wore the white coat, spoke in grand gestures, and pitched his exhibit like a salesman of miracles. But when you stripped away the theatrics, there was a genuine tenderness behind it all. He visited the babies daily. He trained his nurses carefully, and he refused to take a single cent from the families. When reporters asked him why he chose such a strange platform for his work, he simply said, quote, "If the hospitals won't take them, I will. And if the crowd pays the bill, so be it." End quote. That statement sits at the heart of this story, the uneasy balance between morality and survival. Because Dreamland was built on illusion, it sold fantasy. But behind its shining lights and painted facades, Coney was performing real miracles. He blurred the line between entertainment and empathy, between sideshow and sanctuary. And honestly, the public couldn't decide what to feel. Some walked away inspired, believing they'd witnessed the future of medicine. Others walked away truly disturbed, unsettled by the idea of human life as a spectacle. Maybe both were right. Because the truth is, those babies were both on display and being saved. They were both a curiosity and a cause. And perhaps that contradiction is exactly what made this exhibit so hauntingly powerful. Decades later, when Coney was asked if he ever felt shame for displaying human life behind glass, he reportedly answered, quote, "No, I felt shame that no one else would." End quote. In the end, the incubator babies of Coney Island forced the world to look, not just at them, but at the moral cost of indifference. But Dreamland's devotion to spectacle carried a price. The park was enormous, built from wood and plaster and packed with electrical wiring at the time when fire safety was an afterthought. And then came May 27th, 1911, the night the lights went out for good. It started in the early morning hours when a leaking gas line caught fire during maintenance on a ride called Hellgate. Within minutes, flames raced across the park's wooden facades. The wind carried sparks from building to building, igniting everything it touched. The inferno was visible for miles. Crowds gathered helplessly on Surf Avenue as the towers of fire turned Dreamland into a glowing skeleton. Lions and horses from the animal exhibits broke free into the streets. Firefighters struggled to reach the heart of the park, and right in their path was Coney's Incubator building. According to accounts, nurses and attendants rushed inside. They wrapped the infants in blankets, carrying them out one by one through the smoke and chaos. Onlookers watched in disbelief as these tiny lives, the same ones who had once been displayed for public view, were now being rescued in the middle of the night. By sunrise, Dreamland was gone. Every tower, every light bulb, every ornate facade reduced to ash, but not one baby was lost. Dr. Coney's staff had saved all the babies. In a single night, Dreamland, this grand experiment in beauty, progress, and spectacle, vanished. But the Incubator exhibit lived on. Coney rebuilt it elsewhere on Coney Island, and his work continued for decades after the fire. Even as Dreamland itself slipped into myth, it's almost poetic. A place built on illusion, burned to the ground, but the one exhibit devoted to real life, to truth, to science, and compassion survived. And that survival became symbolic. Dreamland had promised to show the world the marvels of modern progress. The Incubator babies were the only part of that promise that truly delivered. Dr. Martin Coney wasn't finished. He rebuilt his exhibit near Luna Park and later took his incubators to World's Fairs, exhibitions, and other amusement parks across the country. Chicago, Atlantic City, Buffalo, even London. Wherever there was a crowd, there was Coney, standing proudly in front of his glass boxes filled with life. For decades, he operated outside the medical establishment, saving premature infants while hospitals turned them away. By the time he retired in the 1940s, it's estimated that he cared for over 6,500 babies and continued that 85% survival rate. Think about that for a moment. Thousands of children who might have been left to die instead grew up. married, had kids of their own. All because a man most doctors dismissed as a sideshow hustler refused to give up on them. Some of those incubator babies lived well into the 2000s. Many told reporters that they owed their lives to the Coney Island exhibit. A few even attended reunions where they'd gather around old photographs, their tiny bodies behind glass, surrounded by curious faces from another century. One woman said, quote, "We were the sideshow that became the standard," end quote. Because that's exactly what happened. By the 1930s, mainstream medicine finally began to catch up. Hospitals across the United States started building premature infant wards equipped with incubators. Many of them modeled after counties' designs. Doctors began to study nutrition, hygiene, and temperature control for preemies. And when World War II arrived, neonatal care became an essential part of military medicine, saving even more lives. But while medicine advanced, County's reputation remained a mystery. For decades, no one knew where he really came from, how he'd been trained, or even if he was truly a doctor at all. County had lied about his birthplace and even changed his name more than once. He claimed to have studied in Paris under Dr. Lyon, the inventor of the incubator, but there are no records of that. He claimed to have medical degrees from prestigious European universities. But again, nothing can be verified. Some historians believe he never actually practiced medicine formally. Others think he fabricated parts of his story to earn public trust. And yet, the irony is impossible to ignore. Whether he was a licensed doctor or not, Martin County did what real doctors refused to do. He saved the very children the medical world had abandoned. There was, however, one doctor who took Martin County seriously, Dr. Julius Hess, a name that would later be remembered as the father of American neonatology. He was not a showman, he was not a carnival figure, he was a physician, deeply respected and the author of the very first U.S. medical textbook on premature infants. And in the preface of that landmark work, right there in black and white, Hess acknowledged County. He credited County's hands-on experience, his survival outcomes, his success where many hospitals had failed. It was a quiet but powerful endorsement. By 1933, the two men were no longer just aligned in spirit, they were working side by side at the Century of Progress World's Fair in Chicago. Dr. Hess publicly supported County's incubator exhibit, and the placement of that exhibit was memorable. Right next door, drawing massive crowds of her own, was Sally Rand, the infamous fan dancer whose feathered burlesque performances scandalized polite society. Picture it. On one side of the midway, neon lights, music, feathers, and forbidden allure. And on the other side, silence, glass incubators, and tiny lives suspended in a fragile balance. The spectacle of survival, standing shoulder to shoulder with the spectacle of seduction. County and Hess both lived to see Cornell Hospital in New York open the first dedicated premature infant station in 1943, which also happened to be the year that County's Coney Island show closed for good. Admission was down, his wife and longtime partner had died, and he was in his 70s. He was also broke. The exorbitant operating expenses at the New York's World's Fair in 1939 had just about ruined him. When he died in 1950, the newspaper called him the Incubator Doctor of Coney Island. It was a strange kind of obituary, equal parts respect and disbelief. He was remembered not as a fraud or a showman, but as a man who turned spectacle into salvation. Today, his legacy lives quietly inside every neonatal intensive care unit, every hospital, every incubator humming with gentle warmth. Each time a premature baby takes its breath inside of one of those glowing chambers, it's echoing the same rhythm that once filled that white pavilion in Dreamland. Something about County's story still lingers. That uncomfortable truth that sometimes progress doesn't start in laboratories or bedrooms. but on the edges of responsibility. In a world that turned its back on the smallest and the weakest, Coney built a stage and said, "Look, don't look away. Maybe that's what Dreamland was always meant to be. Not a park of illusion, but a place that forced us to see the real magic hiding behind the spectacle." It makes you wonder how often progress has been born from discomfort. How often has compassion been disguised as a spectacle just to make people look long enough to care? Dr. Martin Coney may have been part showman, part scientist, or maybe something in between. But what he did at Dreamland remains one of the strangest and moving contradictions in history. A place that sold tickets to see babies and somehow ended up saving them. As a mom of 3 NICU babies, I owe their lives to Dr. Coney and Dreamland that took a chance on an exhibit of curiosity. I will post photos of the original infant incubators and Dreamland on my social media pages, and they are absolutely incredible. These babies really did not have a chance without the intervention of the doctor and his staff. In the coming weeks, we'll dive more into the fires and the history of Coney Island. It is absolutely fascinating, and there is so much dark history at Coney Island. This has been Death Kiss Traveler, where history hides in the strangest places. My name is Marissa, and this was the story of the premature babies of Coney Island's Dreamland. I hope that you have found this dark history tale as intriguing as I have. This podcast is produced by Sunkissed Traveler, the travel agency that can help take the stress out of planning a vacation. Are you thinking of a vacation? A cruise, a theme park, or a weekend ski vacation? Wherever you want to go, Sunkissed Traveler can help. Link in show notes or visit sun-kissedtraveler.com. I'll see you next week.